To the River Landing Bluebird Club presentation for this month. My name is Jim Burke. Been a resident here for a little over 3 years. Sharon and I have. I got to tell you, this is weird, talking to a bunch of empty chairs, but we'll get through it. But the good news for you is you won't be seeing my ugly face on this presentation, because Brian said that the light reflecting off of my head was causing some transmission problems. Seriously, the only disadvantage is I won't be able to use a pointer, because we're running this PowerPoint straight through the computer and not filming it. So that takes my ugly face out of the picture. And hopefully I'll be able to verbally tell you about some of the things that I would have pointed to on the slide. Let me start off first with explaining the Bird Club logo to you. This was designed by Roberta Eyrig. She captured pretty much what we've got here. You'll see that blue wavy line at the bottom. That represents the famous West Fork of the Deep River at the back of the property. The light green grass is the golf course, of course. The taller trees in the background are all those big trees that pretty much surround our campus. And then she put this big tree up, and she has a lot of the species of the birds that live here with us at River Landing. So Bird Club pioneers, this group of people, we kind of got this thing going back in 2008. It wasn't a Bird Club yet. But the late Ned Bryan pulled me aside one day in the bistro, and he said, when he found out I had been involved with bluebirds back in South Carolina, he said, you know, there's 16 nest boxes on the golf course and nobody's taking care of them. So I said, well, show them to me. So we grabbed a golf cart later that day, went out, took a look, and decided to start checking them once a week, which is typical protocol for monitoring nest boxes. And then, as you know, the rumor mill here is endless. Next thing you know, people are coming up and saying, hey, can we go along sometime? We're going, yeah, come on, let's go. So by as we started closing out 2018, we had a bunch of people involved, and we were talking about forming the River Landing Bluebird Society. Well, John Scroggins and Katie moved in, Helen Kilwacky showed up, and they are birders also, you know, bird watchers, bird feeders, and so forth. So as we all talked, we decided, you know what, let's don't call it a Bluebird Society, let's call it a Bird Club. So we can cover all the ground we want to having to do with birds. So that's how we came up with that name. These are the current officers of the club. And anybody want to be a vice president, raise your hand. These are our current directors. I'll point out just a couple in case you have questions about certain things. If you're interested in membership and have questions about becoming a member, you can contact Glenn Jackson. If any of you who have lived in this area for some period of time and may have contacts in some of the local universities and so forth who might be a good speaker for some of our presentations, and it could be anything to do with wildlife, and native plants is another big one, and insects. So you can get hold of Helen Kilwacky, because she's the one that's kind of in charge of getting our programs lined up. And everybody else there has different things that they do. We don't have to get into that today. We've got 49 boxes out here on the campus right now. And as I said, we started out with 16. So we've been really expanding things. And John Scroggins, Pat Kennedy, divided those 49 boxes up between us, and we go out usually on Wednesdays, late February, early March through August. collect data that eventually ends up at Cornell University. And I hope I didn't miss anybody, but I tried to get everybody's name up here who has gone out on the trails and helped gathering data. And all these people have learned a lot. I guess maybe the valedictorian would be Mark Toma. Now that's my own observation. I didn't get to observe everybody. But the first time I went out, Ruth Ann and Mark showed up, and Ruth Ann pulled me aside and she said, now I've got to warn you, Mark's really not interested in birds. Well, in a couple of weeks, that guy was an expert of the proper way that you walk up to a nest box and open it up and collect data. And there's a lot more to it than just walking up and open the door. So I'm really proud of Mark. He studied hard and he got an A on the final exam. Now, from a satellite, this is what our 49-box trail looks like. And I don't have a pointer, but on the right-hand side, you can see Sandy Ridge Road. Then you come in, there's John Knox Drive, come down, there's a Lynx Avenue. And back there in the middle, where it says River Landing at Sandy Ridge in green, that's the Big Red Palace, where most of us get our food and mail and doctors and so forth and so on. But we pretty well covered the campus, although we do have room for more boxes. When that satellite mission was flown, obviously, they were just starting to clear the ground for Caldwell Village and the hybrids, but we do have a couple of boxes up in Caldwell Village at Bill and Elaine Frakes and Ed and Virginia Karas's. And we'll talk about those boxes sometime a little bit later in here also, or at least show some pictures of them. This is the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. Every week I get the 3 notebooks together from our monitoring, collecting the data, and I submit that to NestWatch. That's the first listing under Citizen Science Projects. And these are some great projects that Cornell Lab of Ornithology runs. Here at River Landing, we do participate weekly during nesting season in NestWatch. We have participated in Feeder Watch and the Great Backyard Bird Count. eBird is a good thing if you want to find out answers about birds. You just Google Cornell Lab of Ornithology, search until you find eBird, click on that. You can find out a lot of information about birds. Pay attention to the right side of that photograph of the building. That's part of the visitor center, and I'll be showing you some slides from the inside of part of it a little bit later. But on a typical day, there's about 250 people working in that building. It's a very deep building. It's on a little over 200 acres, a few miles away from the main campus. And if you're ever up in the Ithaca, New York area, go out there. It's open, I think it's only 2 days a year that it's closed for visitors. You can't go through the entire lab, but there are some tours you can take. I was able to spend 3 days up there June of 2019 with 6 other board members from the North American Bluebird Society, having discussions with various staff members up there. And we got some really behind the scene tours up there at the lab. Amazing place. This is the data that we've been sending. We send a whole lot more than just these bottom line numbers. All of our boxes are plotted that you saw on that map by latitude and longitude, how high the entry hole is from the ground, what direction the entry hole is facing. And then every week when we open up one, we record no eggs, 2 eggs, 4 eggs, a partial nest, a complete nest, how many young, did we see any of the adults, a whole lot of data that goes into a big research database at Cornell. And we've been having some pretty good luck. We're growing our bluebirds here for sure. And we've got some other cavity nesting birds that we're also collecting data on that are using our houses. You'll notice that the house sparrows are 0, and that's what we want to keep it. And you'll find out a little bit later why we do that, because they are an invasive, destructive species of bird. And I have a special technique for making sure no eggs hatch. So, if you're not already a member of the bird club, shame on you. When you come over to pick up your in-house mail, you look around where the boxes are up there, and there's a big box against the wall. And that really is the dimensions for a wood duck box that Patrick Kennedy built and modified to make it a mailbox. And I think it was John Scroggins helped him out, figure out how to make a big base for it. So that's up there on the side of that box, which doesn't show in this particular photo. There's a holder with a brochure that contains the membership application. Take one, fill it out, put check or cash in an envelope, drop it in the box, and you'll be a member. We're very picky about what we spend our money for. No big parties. There was somebody one day suggested we buy a corporate jet and name it Bluebird 1 so we could do some traveling, but we voted that down. Okay, let's kind of get into bluebirds, and what I'm hoping here is it's not going to do about just bluebirds. I hope you'll kind of see some things that will cause you to maybe want to do some research reading on your own, because some of us have plenty of time on our hands right now. There are about 10,500 birds worldwide on any given day. That number fluctuates almost every year because continuous research, they either take 2 separate species and make them one, or they take one particular species and make 2 or 3. So that number changes. But that 10,000 plus birds are now then organized into 243 modern bird families. And then down the left-hand side, it shows you how many of those species are in each of the 7 continents. Now, for you math whizzes, if you total that left column up real fast, it's going to come up to 13,165 species. Now, we know that's wrong, but the reason is some of the species live on more than one continent. And the key one here in the middle, out of that 10,500, 925 of them live in the United States. How about this one? Now I got your attention. Birds evolved from dinosaurs. Who would have thought? Well, that's a fact. At least most paleontologists, that's their take on the whole deal. There are a few, like everything in science, there's always at least 2 sides to every story. But this all began about 375 million years ago. Now, for us humans, it's hard for us to get our mind around something taking that long, because we're used to snapping our fingers and something happens. But 375 million years ago, the Earth was one big landmass and one big ocean. And there were a few plants and insects on the land. Well, some of the creatures that were living in the ocean over time decided there may be a better way to make a living. And so they slowly started moving themselves onto land. And then as millions of years go by, the reptiles came, and dinosaurs are reptiles. And they eventually, some of them eventually became birds. Again, we're talking millions and millions of years here. So about 65 million years ago is when the birds split off from the theropod dinosaurs. T-Rex is a theropod. T-Rex can weigh up to 12,000 pounds. Now, how could that ever turn into a bird? Well, not too many 12,000 pound birds flying around here, but it didn't. But from all the research in the fossil record, they're pretty well convinced that birds came from smaller theropod dinosaurs. Now, if you look at T-Rex's feet, they're shaped just like our birds' feet are today. They're just a whole lot bigger. And he has these small forearms, which eventually became wings. So, a lot to look into. And another good thing here to think about is the crocodile is more related to birds than to other species. That's another Google thing that you can be doing tonight. So here's the Cornell Lab of Ornithology's take on the evolution of birds from dinosaurs. This mural is in that big glass visitor center I showed you on the slide of the lab. This mural is 3,000 square feet. It's 40 feet high. And it represents one species from each of the 243 modern bird families, 5 extinct modern bird families, 21 extinct evolutionary species, and 1 black caiman. There's 270 paintings. Every one of these birds is painted to actual size, actual color. It was about a 2.5-year project, and it was done to be completed in 2015, which was the 100th anniversary of the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. It started in 1915 when a zoology professor kept sending requests into the Cornell University administration saying, we need to start an ornithology lab. And they just kept ignoring him. So one day he made a sign and nailed it to his door, to his office. It said Cornell Lab of Ornithology. On the left side where those stairs are that go up to the second floor, you can see all those images are painted in kind of a light gray black. Those are all the extinctions, but it shows the march of evolution as the dinosaurs slowly evolved into birds, and then this is how they populated the 7 continents. This is Jane Kim. She was the main artist for this. And you can see she's working on lifts to get up to paint these birds. And basically, she said she averaged it out. It was probably about a bird a day that she was able to complete. So we came here today to talk about eastern bluebirds primarily, but like I said, we're going to cross a few other paths. This is the eastern bluebird, the male on the left, the real pretty boy, and the female on the right. Now, there's also a mountain bluebird. This bluebird is pretty much all blue except he has a white tummy. The western bluebird, which I can't show you without my pointer, but it's very similar to the eastern bluebird except the orange on his chest does not come up around his neck like it does on the eastern bird, but that's the primary difference. This is where they live at different times of the year. The orange color is summer, where some of them do migrate, and you can see the mountain bluebirds, some of them go all the way to Alaska. The purple areas where they live all year long. And you can see North Carolina is all in purple. Our bluebirds do not migrate. They may move around a little bit for food sources, but that's within a few miles of where they're hatched out. And if they like it where they are, they stay. I can guarantee you a lot of those Yankee bluebirds that come down here when they have really bad winters, I bet you they don't go back to New Jersey or Wisconsin. So why do we care? The the bluebird population dropped by about 90% between the 1920s and the 1970s. Back in those days, this is before computers, there were people across the country who were maintaining bluebird trails. And these people stayed in contact with one another by telephone, by handwritten notes, or by typing a report or something out. A lot of these people were already researchers in different domains. So they knew how to collect data and how to present it. And they kept comparing their data and they said, we got a problem. And so they attributed to the main one was loss of habitat. And loss of habitat is contributed mostly to folks like us, okay? They're predators. Now, so that's nature. There are predators everywhere, you know. Everybody out there in the natural world is somebody else's Happy Meal every day. So unlike us who can get up and go to the bistro or go to the grocery store, critters and wildlife got to go find something on their own. And pesticides. Pesticides are not as bad a problem as they were, but they're still a problem. So anyway, this group of people decided we've got to bring attention to this issue with the general public and educate them and encourage people to put up nest boxes. So the North American Bluebird Society was founded in 1978. I'm a vice president of that. I've been a member since 2011. We currently have 62 affiliates in 32 states, 7 Canadian provinces, and Bermuda. Now, in case you're wondering about Bermuda, you're not the only one. Okay, nobody's been able to determine how the eastern bluebird originally got to Bermuda. A lot of theories. One of them was, well, maybe a hurricane blew it over there, but if you see the tracks of hurricanes, they don't come from Florida to Bermuda, they come across Bermuda to Florida. And somebody said, well, maybe Christopher Columbus took some over on his return voyage. That's just kidding around. But they're there. With DNA research, they have determined that the ancestors of these birds that are living there today had probably been there for over 400 years. Another little thing for your nightly research. Now, you remember 10,500 species of birds worldwide, 925 in the United States, and of that 925, 85 of them are called cavity nesting birds. And they're subdivided into primary cavity nesters and secondary cavity nesters. A primary cavity nester can excavate its own cavity, i.e. a woodpecker. Secondary cavity nesters cannot excavate a cavity, but they've evolved to want to nest in some type of a cavity. And they can come up with some pretty strange things sometimes. But here's a good example of connectivity in nature, because most species of woodpeckers, not all, most, excavate a new cavity every year. They don't reuse their old one. So on the left, we see this bluebird is using an old woodpecker cavity to build its nest in. So here are some of the, what I call home builders of the bird world that we have either right here at River Landing or they are in North Carolina. There's probably one here that we won't have at River Landing, but you never know. So the Downy Woodpecker is the smallest of our woodpeckers. The hairy woodpecker, Red-bellied Woodpecker, the northern flicker. Now this bird got its common name flicker because unlike most of the woodpeckers that hunt for insects on trees, this one you'll most often see on the ground flicking with that big beak through leaves and pine needles and stuff looking for insects. The red-headed woodpecker, Mr. Tuxedo. Yellow-bellied sapsucker, we only see them here in the wintertime. Okay, they don't spend all year here. But they drill little holes in trees to get the sap out. Now, the Pileated Woodpecker is a huge bird. It's about 20 inches from its beak to its tail. It's also a very shy and reclusive bird, and they really prefer larger stands of forest than what we have around here, although on the backside by our big river down there, there's a lot of old trees, a lot of dead ones. One could possibly hammer out a hole in there. Now, if you're ever out in a big forest and you hear it sounds like somebody's pounding a sledgehammer on a tree, it's probably this bird. It can really chop wood. This is the Red-cockaded Woodpecker. It's an endangered species. It's got some usual habits. It doesn't excavate a cavity in a dead tree. It has to be a live tree, preferably a longleaf pine. Hence, you'll see why they become endangered. The lady here in the photograph is Tracy Grazia. She's a wildlife biologist at the Savannah River Ecology Lab on the Savannah River nuclear site outside of Aiken, South Carolina. And we got to know her through the bird club down there, and she'd come give talks. But one of her main jobs is to reestablish colonies of the Red-cockaded Woodpecker at the Savannah River nuclear site, because most of that 300+ square miles is woodland, and a bunch of it is old longleaf pines. Now, the other problem with the Red-cockaded Woodpecker, besides wanting to drill a hole in a live longleaf pine, that can take 2 to 3 years sometimes, and the male works on it too. This means that 2 to 3 years go by and they're not reproducing their population. So here's a big example of unintended consequence of human activity and connectivity. On the map over there, on the right side with all of the green, at one time that was all longleaf pines, over 90 million acres. Humans have reduced that to just over 3 million acres now. On the left side in purple was the historic range of the Red-cockaded Woodpecker. Look how those two maps fit together. So when we took down all the longleaf pines, the Red-cockaded Woodpecker disappeared pretty much. So unintended consequence, connectivity in nature. Someone had a bright idea. What if we help the Red-cockaded Woodpecker out to speed up getting a place to build a nest? So they built this, you can call it a birdhouse if you want to, a bird box. And they climb up on these little skinny aluminum ladders, 60 to 70 feet in the air, with a small chainsaw, and cut out a hole in the side of these big longleaf pine and slip these boxes in. And then they kind of cover them up with sap from the trees and stuff that the Red-cockaded Woodpeckers like to have. That keeps snakes from getting up there. And when they started doing this, if there were any Red-cockaded Woodpeckers in the area where they were doing this, those birds were taken to these things immediately. So that's been a good success. Now if we can just get the longleaf pines back quicker, and that takes a while. It's a big tree, and it takes a long time to grow. Now, some of the other secondary cavity nesters that we have here at River Landing are on these next few slides. Okay, we've got the Carolina Wren, Carolina Chickadee, Tufted Titmouse, brown-headed nuthatch, white-breasted nuthatch, tree swallow. So we've been talking about nest boxes, and that assumes nest building. So let's take a look at a few samples of different types of nests. This picture was taken, you may have seen this box if you're driving up and down the links. This is in Bill and Elaine Frake's backyard, And Elaine took this photograph, and she's a real good photographer. So here's a male and female eastern bluebird starting to work on a nest. Here are a few types of nests. The eastern bluebird, typically, if it's available, build their nest out of pine needles. Down in South Carolina, some of us had some of our trails were out in horse farms, and there were hay fields, lots of grass. Those birds almost always built out of straw and so forth. Sometimes they mix it up a little bit. The brown-headed nuthatch kind of has a variety of things that actually starts out, you can't really see it in this photograph that well. There's some green moss in the background, but they usually have a bottom layer of moss, and then they start putting grass and pine needles and so forth, and they'll drag all fuzzy things in sometime. The Carolina chickadee uses a lot of moss as its base, and then it will line the cup with soft grasses or animal hair. The Carolina chickadee is famous for sneaking up on sleeping dogs lying outside and pulling fur out of them and taking it back and lining their nest with it. I threw in the killdeer nest here. It's not a cavity nesting bird, but just for your interest, it nests right on the ground, and it doesn't spend a whole lot of time making a nest. It just pushes a few dead pieces of straw or weeds or sticks together on the rocks. And if you can see those 3 eggs there, they really look like rocks mixed in with the rest of them. So that's how they hide their nest. Wood ducks, we got involved with wood ducks in South Carolina, had a lot of good boxes, a lot of great success. They are a cavity nesting bird, a secondary cavity nesting bird. They will nest up in old trees that have big holes in them. They will definitely use a Pileated Woodpecker nest because they make a big hole. But we fill them with wood shavings, a couple inches of wood shavings, but once that female starts laying eggs, she then starts pulling down out of her chest and softening up the nest part of it. And she lays 1 egg a day before she incubates. So it takes her a long time. So, there's a bunch of eggs there. I think I counted those once. It was 11. So 11 days go by before any incubation starts on that one. The eastern screech owl, this is a box Sharon and I put up in a little wooded area next to our house in Aiken. And again, we put some wood shavings down. The female brings in some leaf materials maybe to soften it up. Again, this one's kind of hard to see, but there's a red female eastern screech owl in the background. There's 2 owlets, and there's 1 more egg to hatch if you look straight back. Unlike a lot of our songbirds that lay 1 egg a day until they complete the clutch and start to incubate, a lot of the raptors, hawks and owls, will lay an egg and start to incubate, and then they may lay another egg a couple days later and maybe another one. The problem with that is there gets to be competition between the siblings because that first one to hatch has got a 2 to 3 day head start on everybody else, and he can sometimes hog the food. Sometimes they kill their siblings, sometimes they throw them out of the nest. And then there's a piece of a green frog right underneath that female's face that you probably can't see. Screech owls are small owls, 9 to 10 inches high. They are very careful when they go out to hunt because barred owls and great horned owls will scarf them up in a heartbeat. But this was the first time we did anything with screech owls, and I started noticing I'd go out there, the first time I went out there after a few weeks, opened that up, I was looking at this female screech owl, and I thought, oh my gosh. And I kept talking to her, and then I reached up and stroked her on the head a little bit, and then stroked her back, and I thought, maybe she won't bite or claw me. But curiosity got the best of me. So I gently reached over her and lifted her straight up. She had 2 eggs, and I set her back down. And after that, I'd go out there, I'd get on the ladder and start talking, so thinking she knows what my voice is. And I kept thinking, you know, stupid, if you fall off with this 8-foot ladder, if this bird attacks you and you fall off, I said, you're going to break your neck. And the first thing Sharon would do, I know, would be looking for the file on the insurance policy. So, and then she'd call the medics. Just kidding, sweetie. Okay, you can learn a lot if you really pay attention to wildlife. Now, one of the things I learned, I kept noticing I'd go out there, and suddenly, as days went by and she's feeding these young owls, there were ended up a lot of cardinal feathers and dove feathers. I thought, that's kind of weird. Why aren't there other feathers of other birds in here? And then it dawned on me from watching our bird feeders that the first birds at the feeder in the morning, when it was still a bit dark even, would be the cardinals and the doves. And those were the 2 species that were at the feeders when it almost got dark in the evening. Well, that's the time the owl is going to be feeding. So she would swoop in, I guess, grab a bird, and she doesn't eat the bird or anything. She grabs it, it goes back and gets in her nest box so that she doesn't get grabbed up by the bigger prey. Great crested flycatcher. Maybe this next year we'll build a box or 2 for them. It's a little bit bigger box than the Bluebird box, and put some out because they could use some help out there also. The interesting thing about the flycatcher is it almost always has snakeskin as part of its nest. It goes out and finds snake skins that have been shed and brings them back in. The tree swallow, we have them here. If you walk around the ponds, you'll see them flying around. One of the interesting things they do is they go out and gather feathers they find from other birds and bring them back and incorporate them into their nest. And if I'm correct, I think this photo was from the Karras' box in their backyard. Now, here's a strange one, okay? A lot of you might know Bob Farne, okay? Bob's a good guy. I get a call one day from her, and she said, Bob found this really unusual nest. Will you come over and look at it? And so I went over, and they gave it to me in a takeaway box from the bistro. And I really couldn't identify it, so I took photographs and sent it to some guys in South Carolina that I used to hang out with who were a lot smarter about birds than I'll probably ever be. But anyway, they got back to me and said, hey, that's a chipping sparrow nest. That's a very small nest. I should have had a ruler by it. The chipping sparrow is only about 5 inches long, as composed to, say, a bluebird, which is about 7. So you can see it's a relatively small bird. And I got to retake that photograph with dark paper because that bird incorporated some clear plastic netting. It almost wraps around the whole nest. And how it found it and got it back to the nest without getting tangled in it, pretty interesting. But anyway, Bob's story, allegedly story, was he was out kind of strolling in one of the wooded areas by the golf course and happened to see this on the ground. Well, that worked. I mean, I could believe that because a few days before we did have some high winds. But then I'm thinking, okay, if you're out walking, you have to see that nest on the floor of the woods, you'd have to really be looking hard down. I'm thinking Bob was out there looking for one of those errant little round white balls that sometimes come off of the stick in the wrong direction. I'm just saying, okay? Bob may have been out just for a walk. Okay, I could have 1,000 pictures up here places and how birds choose to build where they decide to build. I think the one at the top was Ruth Ann Toma. It's hard to see it, but there is a Carolina wren has built a tunnel nest back into that plant. That's her cavity. Okay. The Civil War cannon here on the left. Sharon and I went to a conference some years ago in Tennessee, and one day there was kind of days to take a half a day off and go see stuff. So we went out to the Shiloh National Battlefield and we're walking around. This was in October, end of nesting season, and we're walking by this row of cannons, and I happened to see, I said, that's pine straw, that's got to be a bluebird nest. And sure enough, it was an old bluebird nest. The bluebird had built the nest in that cavity. The photo on the right is taken on our third floor balcony at Glen Eagles. Let's see, the Lontes live up on the fourth floor, and they have some bird feeders. So Scott and Marcia have, I don't know how much money they've spent on bird food up there, but I feel bad about it sometimes. I keep saying, let me give you some money for the food because our bluebirds were going, hey, Sharon and I were standing there looking out the living room window one day, and we saw a pair of bluebirds fly up to their balcony. And I had this spare box on our balcony just to have it out there in the corner in case we needed it for an emergency out on the bluebird trail. And we looked at each other and we said, hey, you know what? Let's just put the box up on the table and see what happens. The next day, that pair of bluebirds started building a nest in the box on our balcony. And we were able to sit 6 or 7 feet away behind the glass door. And I learned so much that I never knew about the behavior of bluebirds when they're nesting. But it was a thrill. Okay, back to our buddies, okay? Now, here's Bluebird Habitat. It's pretty easy. They need food, water, shelter, and a nest site. Now, if you look at the right-hand column, look what that first sentence, open space, scattered trees, low ground cover, and water. What does that sound like? That's the River Landing campus. We got open space, we got scattered trees, we got low ground cover because they like that because they mainly eat insects. And we got the red ponds, okay? Maybe one day they'll look like a real pond water again. But anyway, they like open area. Golf courses, pastures, parks, cemeteries, industrial campuses, everywhere. And they're tolerant of human activity. I mean, you can see that right here in this campus. We've got boxes right by the cart paths in some places. The Frakes have a box in their backyard. It's probably 20 feet away from the Lynx Drive with all the kind of people driving up there, down there all the time. So bluebirds seem to like people. And this is a longleaf forest. This is what a real longleaf pine forest looks like. No undergrowth. This is in Hitchcock Woods in Aiken, South Carolina. Beautiful place, over 2,000 acres. Has 70 miles of trails. You can only be in there 2 ways. One, walking or running on your 2 feet or on a horse's back. No wheeled vehicles of any type. So predators, kind of address that a little bit. Everybody out there is somebody else's meal, okay? But if we're going to put up bird nest boxes, then we need to do what we can to protect the birds or don't put them up. So raccoons, we got them here. They're intelligent and they're strong. You can see this one is ripping the top off this box. It's not one of ours. I stole that picture years ago. I don't remember where I stole it from, but anyway, it's a good one. This predator baffle on the right was in Penny Crittlebird's backyard. She had a nice box back there. And we're thinking that raccoon, you can see the prints on it, had to have jumped off the side of that embankment. And so we might move that box a little bit and do a couple other things next year. Okay, snakes, don't kill them. They have a rightful place in nature. Our two biggest ones we have to worry about as birders are the rat snake and corn snake, okay? This one down in the lower left, this real beautiful color, is a corn snake. And you can see there's some lumps in that body. I got a call one day, the guy was checking the box just a block and a half from our house. He said, can you come down to the Teesfeld's backyard? He said, I think there's a snake in the box and I'm afraid of him. So I went down, sure enough. So I got that snake out, threw it on the ground, and it crawled off. I start reaching in to pull the old nest out, and I grabbed onto another corn snake. And it wasn't too happy when I dropped him on the ground. He coiled up right away and started striking, but they're non-venomous. Same thing with the rat snakes. They're not venomous. The upper photo on the left, Now Shield took that picture on the golf course. And that is a rat snake. You can see it has a white throat. And they're kind of an interesting snake. If you walk up on one, they typically just freeze and maybe kink their body up so maybe you think it's a stick. That's a myth, but anyway, but they do that. You can pick them up, and most of the time they don't bite, but don't pick them up. The one on the, I can't remember where I got the one at the top, but I wanted to show that because that snake is crawling up, straight up a tree, and it's not a heavy bark tree like a pine tree, but that's how strong it is. Both these snake species are members of the constrictor family. So they're very muscled, extremely strong. The one on the lower right is crawling up the stone wall by our dining room in Aiken, South Carolina when we lived there. So they are excellent climbers, and that's why we have to protect against them. But they serve a good purpose. These animals eat a lot of rodents. So let me get a show of hands of who's seen a flying squirrel. I don't see it. Oh, there's one hand. I'll bet you most of you out there raised your hand sitting in your house. Or I started to raise your hand, but I'll bet you most of you never seen a flying squirrel. And the reason being they're a nocturnal animal. They can fit through the 1.5-inch hole of a nest box. They will eat the eggs, they will eat the young. They start nesting in early winter. And what we do in areas where we've had problems with them in South Carolina is we go out frequently and check those boxes in the areas where there are a lot of large trees to start with. And we take the nest out and carry the material away with us so they have to start from scratch again. Eventually, they seem to get tired of that and leave. Now, sometimes if we go out there and we're too late getting there and there are baby squirrels in there, we just leave them be, let them grow up to be a pest. But anyway, it's an interesting animal. It really can't fly. It has attachments from its body to its legs, so it glides. Theoretically, it has a 3-to-1 glide ratio. So if that squirrel is 100 feet up in a tree, it could conceivably glide the length of a football field. And they're quite accurate. When they jump from something to go somewhere else, they can land on top of one of our nest boxes. Okay, cats, Sarah Leitner, if you're listening and watching, please don't be mean to me when you see me again. Cats kill billions of birds and small mammals every year. They're actually a non-native species to this country, but they are smart, they're good jumpers, and they're genetically programmed to hunt. So when people say, well, it's okay for my cat to run loose, because I keep it well fed. Doesn't matter. You can have your cat as well fed as you think you can do it, and that cat is going to hunt just to play with something, okay? That's what they're programmed to do. So again, the baffles that we use keep the cats at bay. Okay, let's talk about a couple of non-native species. Most of our birds are protected by the Migratory Bird Treaty Act of 1918, but there are a couple that are not. Okay, these birds are very invasive. They're destructive to some wildlife, seed and fruit crops. They can transmit diseases. And as I said, they're not protected by the federal law. So we can destroy them using humane means. The adults, the nest, the eggs, and the young. Okay, this is what they look like. The male is at the lower side on the right. Eggs, nothing fancy about that. But they should be banned just because they don't know how to build a decent looking nest. They build the ugliest nest of any bird I've ever seen. And sometimes we find them, there'll be pieces of plastic, cigarette butts, all kind of stuff in their nest. Now this is what a house sparrow will do if they corner an adult bluebird in a box. They kill it, they'll kill the young, they'll either peck into the eggs or they'll pull the eggs out and just drop them on the ground. And the problem here is a house sparrow is not an insect-eating bird. It's a grain seed-eating bird, so it has a strong beak. The bluebird is mainly an insect and fruit eater, so it has a softer beak. It can't crunch a lot of things, okay? So before 1850, there were no house sparrows on either of these two continents. Somebody up in New York City got this idea. They'd been to England and saw these little brown birds, and they said they were having troubles with insects in the parks, eating up some of the vegetation. They said, well, let's bring some over. So they brought, I think it was 50 pair to start with, turned them loose, and they brought some more. But nobody thought to ask somebody who might know something about house sparrows. They brought them over to eat insects. They're not insect eaters, okay? They're seed eaters, grain eaters, and garbage eaters. These are the birds, if you go to an outdoor area to eat, these little brown birds that are flopping around, pooping on the chairs and the tables and everywhere else, those are house sparrows, okay? But anyway, these birds have exploded. So from 1850, zero, till they occupy almost all of North America and half of South America. European starling, same story. This happened in the 1890s. A group of people who loved William Shakespeare got the idea, why don't we import from Europe all of the species that Shakespeare mentions in any of his writings? So I think it was 4 or 5 different species of birds. They brought a bunch of each over and turned them loose in New York. All of them died off pretty quickly, except for the European starling. This bird cannot fit into the entry hole of a bluebird nest box, but it can fit into a lot of the woodpecker holes, and so they can take over some of the woodpecker nesting. They also sometimes gather in flocks of thousands. They will swoop into an area where there are berries on trees, and within a few hours, everything is gone. And that takes away food from our native species. Okay, let's go back to the birds again. I keep moving you back around. I want to make sure you're staying awake and alert, making some good notes. And Mark, there will be a test. All right. Usually in January, certainly no later than early February, the male bluebird will start looking for a nesting site and establishing a territory. These birds are all nice to each other. the bluebirds are, part of the year. But when it gets to be nesting time, they don't want any other bluebirds in their territory. They don't bother anybody else, but there can be some big bluebird battles between the males. So this guy is looking for a place to show the female, and he has to attract her to convince her he would make a good mate. Okay, so the first thing he does is his color really brightens up. And then he has these wing waves he does to show off his colors. Okay, this is actually a wave. Here's another one. He's going, hey baby, look at me. Okay, I've got the right genes for you. And then he'll bring her some little treats. Again, to show her he is going to be a good provider. And it turns out the male bluebird is an excellent example of how a man needs to take care of his family. He does a great job. But she still, a lot of times, just keeps giving a hard time. He may have to show her more than one nesting site before she goes, yeah, okay. The first one you showed me, I didn't like the granite on the countertops in the kitchen, but maybe you can find something a little bit different. And sometimes he might take her out to dinner, like he's taking her over here to show her where a bunch of mealworms are. And maybe with a little candlelight and some wine, who knows? They could be starting a home, okay? Now, the female does almost all the nest building. Now, one thing we did see up on our balcony, because we were close a lot of hours, the male starts out putting in some materials to start with, and maybe us trying to convince the female, hey, look, you need to really get in here and get to working on this place. But the female really does all the nest building. But his job at that time is to protect their territory and protect her while she's focused on bringing nesting materials. And we watched, once on our balcony, when that female would really get going, she would be at just about sunup starting to go out and bring materials in, and she would be bringing it back until almost dark. So that is a hard-working woman. Okay, how long from eggs to flight? Now, we all grew up calling these things birdhouses, but birds don't really live in houses. They spend just a few short weeks of their life in one of these boxes, okay? So typical for the bluebirds, and most of our songbirds kind of fall in this category. They lay one egg a day in the morning typically and leave. They don't start incubating until they've completed their clutch. By doing so, all those eggs will hatch within a few hours of each other. So all those little birds are the same size. They're not competing for food. Then they incubate for 12 to 14 days. It can be plus or minus a day or so, one way or the other, depending on a lot. It has to do with ambient temperature. And then they will stay in the box for 16 to 20 days, typically. And then they all leave. And this photo at the bottom was a stop-action shot of a young bluebird flying out. So total time might be a maximum 34 days that they would be in there, either being incubated or being fed before they fledge. Sometimes when we've been out on our trail and we open up a box out here, you might be eyeball to eyeball with a female bluebird. Sometimes they won't leave the nest. Most of the time we close the box up quietly and go away. A few times I've been so enthralled with the whole thing back before we moved here, I've actually reached in, picked up the female, counted the eggs, and set her back down and closed the door. She just stays there. That's pretty exciting, actually. So there's a clutch of 3 eggs of a bluebird. This is a typical nest, pine straw. Now, the bluebird of happiness blessed some people here at River Landing this year. These are white bluebird eggs. And this is why it's kind of amazing. Of all the bluebird eggs that are laid every year, less than 5% of them are white. Okay, they're all mostly blue. There's still a couple of theories out there that the scientists are arguing over. over whether it's just the female has to have that genetic makeup, or does it take a male and a female having the same genetic makeup to produce a white egg. But anyway, nest box 16 is in the backyard of John and Katie Scroggins. They not only had one clutch, that pair came back and nested again and produced another clutch of white eggs. Now, while that second part was going on, another pair, because of the timing, it couldn't have been the same pair, went to Penny Krittleberg's backyard and produced a clutch of white eggs. And this one, John was out monitoring that week. You can see that the one egg up in the upper right is starting to open. So that little bird is slowly pecking its way out of there. Now, some of you are probably thinking, well, I guess those birds are going to be albino, right? All white, pink eyes. Nope. They come out looking just like all the other bluebirds, all right? So it's just a genetic thing about the eggs that cause them to be white instead of blue. So here's another one that's starting to hatch as the clutch is 6. Here's just a few hours old. That is an ugly bird at that point. It's hard to believe they grow up to be so pretty. 2 days old, 6 days old. By 10 days, we can start to tell the boys from the girls because the boys are starting to get some blue on their feather tips, wing tips. Here's a male bird taking a fecal sac out. Elaine Frakes got that shot, and that's basically like a diaper. It's an enclosed sac, so to speak. It contains a young bird's waste, and to keep the nest clean, the adult birds, when they come in and feed one, if they look around, there's a fecal sac, they pick it up and take it, and they don't just drop it on the ground. I've seen them take them out of the box on our balcony, fly all the way across the 4th green and drop them in those big tree line over there because they don't want to attract any predators. Now, how do they know that does that? But they know that. So here they are, 12 days, really starting to look like a bluebird, 14, 16. This is what a young fledgling looks like. It's got all that camouflage on his front, and that's to help his parents hide him in the trees until they get, after a few weeks, where they really can fly well and they can hunt on their own. It's the typical bluebird family. There's actually 5 baby birds there. It's hard to see them, but if you count the beaks, there are 5 in there. And the male's already got a mouthful of worms or caterpillars to feed them. Both parents will take care of them for another week or so, but about after that, the female will typically start building a new nest. And now it's up to the male for another 2 to 3 weeks at least to continue feeding, teaching them, these birds, how to find food on their own. And he's making them fly around and exercise their wings and get their strength up. And then if you've got a water feature in your yard, he will bring them to that water feature. If you've got food, he will bring it to that. But as we'll see, bluebirds mainly eat insects and berries. Now those numbers aren't firm. Those are just kind of close. It varies throughout the year. But the bluebirds will eat mealworms that you can buy down at Wild Birds Unlimited here, for example. They also like sunflowers, but it has to be the sunflower meats. The shells have to be removed, and you can buy those by the bagful. And it's very effective because all of that seed is edible, so none of it gets wasted. I think the picture up on the right is from Ruth Ann Thoma. I stole the one on the left years ago. But bluebirds love water. You put up some water features in your backyard, you'll get bluebirds playing in them. Okay, here's what you can do. If you want to, become a backyard birder. The bird club people will help you do the thing right, okay? Don't put up a box if you're not going to monitor it during the nesting season, or have somebody in the bird club monitor it. It's just that simple. And the policy of the North American Bluebird Society is no nest box is better than an unmonitored nest box. Join the bird club. You'll learn a lot. You'll get to hang out with some pretty cool people. Here's a whole new topic that I hope we'll get somebody to come in and talk about. Native, we need native trees, shrubs, and vines. Because birds, insects, native birds, native insects, native vines all develop together. A native oak tree will support over 500 species of caterpillar. A lot of these Asian plants that people put around your yard, and we got way too many crepe myrtles here. Those things are worthless as far as supporting birds and insects that the birds need. Because baby birds, almost of all species, grow up on eating caterpillars. Get your kids involved in this stuff. Okay, put the box in an open area. Predator baffle is important. Monitor it once a week, not in the morning or late afternoon. Be careful opening that door after day 12. Don't open it after day 16. After 3 days, if you have eggs that hatch and there's still some eggs in there, take them out because they're not going to hatch. And then clean out that box, the old nest, because the female will not reuse the old nest, but if she builds a new one on top of it, it gets that second nest too close to the opening, and the young fledglings can fall out before they can fly. What are your questions? Let me see a raise of hands. I don't see any hands going up. Okay, good, no questions. I guess I covered it all. Last thought here, beautiful birds.